Commander Harlan Vex stood on the bridge of the mercenary ship, Rustbucket, a name as charming as its smell. The ship had seen better days, but so had everyone Harlan knew. He squinted at the derelict colony ship projected on the main screen like a ghost that refused to die. "Looks like a tin can with aspirations," he said, scratching the stubble lining his jaw. "Yeah, and we're the morons hired to crack it open," replied Thalia, the ship's engineer, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She leaned against a console, smirking at the irony of it all. "Bet there's nothing in there but stale air and broken dreams." "Dreams don't pay," Vex muttered, shifting his gaze from the screen to his second-in-command, Jarvik, who was busy picking his teeth with a screwdriver. "What do you think, Jarv? I think this is the sort of job where someone gets their head bitten off," Jarvik said, inspecting the screwdriver with the seriousness of a surgeon. "Great," Vex said, clapping his hands together. "Let's head over and make sure it's not one of us." They suited up in the hangar, a cramped space that smelled like rust and regret. Vex's suit had more patches than original fabric, and the oxygen indicator was stuck on maybe, but reliability was relative when you were a mercenary. "Just another day in paradise," muttered Thalia, slapping a fresh battery into her suit's power module. She was always the optimist of the group, which said a lot when your team was a collection of cynics and misfits. The trip to the colony ship was short and uneventful, but not without the constant bickering that was the soundtrack of their lives. The docking process was smoother than expected, something that immediately made Vex suspicious. "All right, team," Vex said, his voice crackling over the comms. "Let's be professional here. No shooting each other unless absolutely necessary." "Define absolutely," Jarvik quipped, earning a chuckle from Thalia. The airlock hissed open, welcoming them into the ghost ship with the warmth of a tax audit. The corridors were dim, lit by emergency lights that flickered just enough to be annoying. "Cozy," Thalia said, her voice echoing off metal walls as they moved deeper into the bowels of the ship, their footsteps clanging like a funeral march. "Anyone else feel like we're walking into a bad horror flick?" Jarvik asked, sweeping his flashlight across the walls. "Only if you start hearing violin music," Vex replied. "Keep focused. We need to find the bridge and see what happened here." They reached the bridge without incident, much to everyone's surprise and disappointment. Vex approached the main console, which looked as neglected as everything else. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," he said, plugging in a portable power unit. The console blinked to life, displaying a series of logs. With a few quick commands, Vex accessed the latest entries. "Looks like the last log was a month ago," Vex said, scrolling through text that seemed to have been written by someone under extreme duress. "Crew disappeared, systems failing, pretty standard stuff. Anything useful?" Thalia asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Depends on your definition," Vex replied, eyes narrowing as he came across a particularly cryptic entry. "Listen to this. We've been classified as Level 0 by an unknown authority. Evacuation impossible. Await further instructions." "Level 0, Jarvik asked. "Sounds like a bad video game score, or a euphemism for you're screwed," Thalia added. "Who classifies entire species?" Vex wondered aloud. "And who the hell are these unknown authorities?" "Sounds like someone with too much time on their hands," Jarvik said, kicking an empty food container across the floor. Vex downloaded the logs onto a datapad, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease. "We need to report this back to HQ. They'll want to know about this weird alien bureaucracy." "You think HQ will care?" Thalia asked, skepticism woven into every word. "Only if it affects their paychecks," Vex said, "but it's better than hanging around here waiting for whatever classified us to show up." As they headed back to the rust bucket, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The logs were just too convenient. Like finding a note in a thriller that said, "The killer is behind you." "You know," Thalia said as they entered the airlock, "I can't help but feel like we've just been handed a big pile of bullshit." "You're not alone," Vex said, sealing the ship behind them. "But bullshit or not, it's what we've got." They powered up the rust bucket, its engines sputtering to life with the enthusiasm of a pensioner. As they left the derelict ship behind, Vex couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that their problems were just beginning. "Level 0, he muttered to himself. "What does that even mean?" "Sitting ducks, probably," Jarvik offered, slumping into the co-pilot's chair. "Or maybe we're just the universe's favorite punching bag." As they moved away from the lifeless giant, the stars seemed to twinkle with a bit more malice than usual. Whatever the universe had in store for them, Vex knew it wouldn't be boring. "All right, everyone," Vex announced. "Let's get this intel back and figure out which end is up. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get to shoot something along the way." "Finally, something to look forward to," Thalia said with a grin. The rust bucket disappeared into the void, leaving behind a mystery as cold and empty as space itself, and Vex couldn't help but wonder if they were heading toward answers or more questions. Maybe both, probably both. The universe never did anything the easy way. Harlan Vex stood on the creaky bridge of the rust bucket, contemplating the latest enigma the universe had lobbed their way like a rotten tomato. The derelict colony ship drifted behind them, a silent accusation against the void. He scratched his jaw, contemplating the cryptic nature of Level 0, a term as ambiguous as a politician's promise. Right, he muttered, turning to his ragtag crew, who were assembled with all the enthusiasm of cats at a dog show. Back and we go, I guess. Maybe this time we'll figure out why that ship is less lively than a morgue at midnight. Thalia adjusted her tool belt, as ready as anyone could be to embrace the unknown. I'm guessing they didn't leave a welcome mat, she said. Or snacks, only if you consider existential dread a snack, Jarvik chipped in, his tone as dry as a Martian sandstorm. But hey, maybe we'll find a vending machine that accepts moral bankruptcy instead of credits. Vex chuckled, an involuntary sound that surprised him more than anyone else. Let's not get our hopes up. If this trip turns out to be anything other than a colossal waste of time, I'll eat my helmet. With that, they suited up again. The Rustbucket's cargo bay was as inviting as a drunk uncle at a family reunion, but it was theirs, and you had to play the hand you were dealt. The docking process went smoothly, though Vex had learned that in this business, smooth was often a precursor to painful. Re-entering the derelict, they found the corridors unchanged, still dim, still flickering, still colder than a tax collector's heart. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the ship like a chorus of ghosts. Feels like we're walking through a Friday night in my hometown, Jarvik said, his flashlight beam bouncing across corroded metal. Dark, empty, and full of bad decisions. They passed compartments filled with the detritus of lives abruptly halted, personal items scattered like leaves in a storm, abandoned tech humming with the last embers of power. Each item was a silent witness, an unwritten chapter in a story that had ended too soon. Look at this, Thalia said, stooping to examine a pile of discarded devices. Her voice was tinged with the curiosity of a cat about to knock something off a shelf. These are comm units, there's got to be dozens of them. Someone was trying to get a message out, or they were preparing for a very one-sided game of charades, quipped Jarvik. Vex scanned the room, noting the haphazard array of equipment and the desperate graffiti scrawled on the walls. One phrase in particular caught his eye, no response. Classified as Level 0. Seems like they were trying to talk to whoever the hell classified them, Vex said, a frown creasing his forehead. Fat lot of good it did. Thalia rifled through the equipment, her hands moving with the assurance of someone who'd disassembled more engines than she'd eaten hot meals. These are all top-tier units, but they've been tampered with like someone was trying to hack a signal through. Didn't work, I take it, Vex said, folding his arms. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, picking through their failures like vultures at a banquet. Pretty much, Thalia agreed, her fingers pausing on a device with a cracked screen. This one's still holding some charge. Maybe we can pull something useful. Jarvik shifted uneasily, his gaze darting to the shadows that seemed to deepen the further they ventured. You ever get the feeling you're being watched? Only when I'm awake, Vex replied. But keep your eyes peeled. This place gives me the creeps. They pressed on, moving through the bowels of the ship with the deliberate caution of people who knew all too well what happened when you assumed the best. The corridors wound like the intestines of some ancient beast, leading them to a large chamber sealed with a blast door. This looks promising, Vex said, gesturing to the door. Or ominous. Either way, we should take a look. Thalia set to work on the controls, her eyes alight with the challenge. The door groaned open with the reluctance of a teenager asked to take out the trash, revealing a room crammed with abandoned tech, monitors, servers, and equipment that looked like it had been patched together by someone who believed duct tape could solve any problem. Wow, Jarvik said, stepping inside. Looks like the IT department from hell. The monitors flickered to life automatically, triggered by their presence like some digital resurrection. Lines of code scrolled across the screens, interspersed with desperate messages from the former occupants. Awaiting further instructions, Vex read aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. Doesn't sound like they ever got those instructions, or if they did, they weren't the kind you'd want to follow, Thalia added, scanning through the logs. As they absorbed the chaotic collage of data, a transmission suddenly cut through the static, a voice crackling an alien, speaking a language that was both familiar and utterly foreign. That can't be good, Jarvik muttered, translating the tone if not the words. I mean, no one's ever sent us a transmission saying, "Congratulations, you've won a free cruise." Vex listened, trying to parse meaning from the noise. We need to record this. HQ might have someone who can translate gibberish. Thalia fiddled with her comm unit, capturing the transmission as it repeated, the alien authority seemingly disinterested in their comprehension. As they did so, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, a palpable reminder that they were trespassers here. Let's get out of here, Vex said, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. We've poked the hornet's nest enough for one day. They retreated back through the ship, the corridors now feeling more suffocating than ever. The oppressive silence was a weight they could feel pressing on their shoulders, urging them to hurry, to leave this place and its secrets behind. Back on the rust bucket, they stripped off their suits, the air inside the ship suddenly feeling like a warm embrace after the chill of the derelict. "Well," Jarvik said, dropping into a chair with all the grace of a collapsing star, "that was fun. Next time, let's just play cards or something." Vex didn't respond immediately, his mind occupied with the implications of what they'd found. "Thalia, how long to decode that transmission?" "Depends," she said, plugging the unit into the ship's comms. "If it's anything like the last puzzle you gave me, I might need a few years and a stiff drink." "Better make it 2 stiff drinks," Vex replied, watching the data scroll across the screen. "HQ won't be happy about this, but they need to know." As they set a course back to base, the rust bucket's engines rumbled to life, carrying them away from the derelict and its ghostly echoes. Vex settled into the captain's chair, the weight of their discovery pressing down on him like a bad hangover. "Level 0, he repeated to himself. "Just how deep does the rabbit hole go?" "Probably all the way to hell," Jarvik answered, not looking up from his station. "But at least it'll be an interesting ride." The stars stretched out before them, a glittering tapestry of unknowns, each one a potential threat or opportunity, or both. As the rust bucket slipped into the sea of stars, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stirred something best left undisturbed. "Whatever comes next," Vex said, a hint of grim determination in his voice, "we'll face it like we always do, head on and with a middle finger ready. And maybe a laser cannon or two," Thalia added, grinning as she tapped the console. "Never hurts to be prepared." With a final glance at the derelict receding in the distance, Vex nodded. Whatever mysteries the universe held, they were far from finished with him or his crew. But for now, all they could do was move forward, one mystery at a time, and hope the universe didn't decide to bite back too hard. The rust bucket's engines hummed like a disgruntled wasp as it coasted through the void, carrying its weary crew back to the derelict colony ship for yet another round of cosmic dumpster diving. Commander Harlan Vex sat at the helm, staring at the screens with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. "Back to the haunted house," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Someone remind me where I left my sense of self-preservation." Thalia, tinkering with a comm unit like it was a puzzle box full of regrets, glanced up. "Probably in the same place you left your optimism, right next to your bedside pistol." "Not true," Jarvik chimed in from his station, eyes glued to the radar like a hawk with trust issues. "Vex keeps that under his pillow, next to his dreams of early retirement." Vex chuckled dryly. "If only dreams paid the bills." "All right, let's hope this time we don't wake up the ship's murderbots." The rust bucket docked with the derelict like an awkward hug from a long-lost relative, functional but lacking any real warmth. They suited up and prepared to explore the ship's bowels once more, each of them silently praying their suits would hold together like a budget space opera plot. As they stepped aboard, the air was tinged with a musty scent, like forgotten expectations and stale coffee. The corridors were as welcoming as a dentist's waiting room, and the flickering lights overhead cast shadows that danced like they were auditioning for a horror vid. "Didn't we just leave this party?" Jarvik muttered, his voice carrying a mix of morbid curiosity and weary resignation. "Looks like it," Thalia replied, her eyes scanning their surroundings with all the caution of someone expecting a jump scare. "And like every bad party, it seems we're the only ones who showed up." They made their way back through the labyrinthine corridors, following the path of discarded hopes and broken dreams. The derelict's silence was a heavy blanket, oppressive and stifling. Every step echoed like a cannon shot in a canyon, a grim reminder of the emptiness that had claimed this place. It wasn't long before they reached the chamber with the blast door, the IT department from hell, and Thalia set to work on the controls. Her fingers danced across the panel with a practiced efficiency that would have been impressive if not for the circumstances. As the door reluctantly creaked open, an alarm blared, a sound so shrill and sudden it made Vex curse and reach for his sidearm, like an old gunslinger who just heard the saloon doors swing open. "Great," Jarvik said, deadpan as ever. "I guess we found the welcome back committee." As if on cue, the chamber's defenses activated. Panels slid open, and automated drones emerged, their mechanical eyes glowing with the kind of malice usually reserved for rent collectors and ex-wives. "Well, this is just peachy," Vex growled, drawing his pistol and taking aim. Thalia shut them down. "I'm trying," she snapped back, fingers flying over the controls like a virtuoso pianist forced to play at gunpoint. The drones buzzed toward them with all the friendliness of a rabid dog, their weapons primed and ready to turn the intruders into space dust. Vex fired, his shots ringing out in the confined space, each one a desperate plea for survival. "Looks like we're getting shot at," Jarvik observed, ducking behind a console and returning fire. Wasn't this on your list of things to avoid, Commander? Yeah, Vex grunted, squeezing off another round. But like most lists, it's more of a guideline than a rule. Celia, meanwhile, was engaged in a tug-of-war with the ship systems, her face set in grim determination as she tried to override the defenses. "I've almost got it," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of gunfire and mechanical fury. Vex and Jarvik continued to lay down suppressive fire, their shots echoing through the chamber with a staccato rhythm that would have been almost musical if it wasn't also deadly. The drones bobbed and weaved, their programming making them annoyingly difficult targets. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Thalia punched in the final command, and the drones froze midair like marionettes with their strings cut. They hovered for a moment, then dropped unceremoniously to the floor with a series of clanks that echoed the crew's collective sigh of relief. "Nicely done," Vex panted, lowering his weapon. "I've seen less intense weddings." "Thanks," Thalia replied, brushing a rogue strand of hair from her face. "So what now, fearless leader?" Vex eyed the room, its chaos now stilled into an uneasy calm. "Now we find out what the hell this level 0 business is all about." He moved to a console, brushing aside debris to reveal a data port. "Let's see if we can dig up something useful." Thalia joined him, sliding a data spike into the port and initiating a transfer. The screens flickered to life, displaying streams of information that scrolled too fast for the human eye to catch more than a glimpse. "Looks like a lot of bureaucracy," she commented, scanning the data with a critical eye. "Orders, classifications, someone was up to their eyeballs in red tape, or whatever color tape they use out here," Vex added dryly. "Any idea who they are?" "Not yet, but I'm downloading everything," Thalia replied, her eyes narrowing at the screen. "Looks like there's a data core in here somewhere. If we can get to it, we might find something more concrete." "Lead the way," Vex said, gesturing for her to take point. "And let's hope the core isn't guarded by more of those trigger-happy tin cans." They navigated the twisted corridors, following the digital trail left by Thalia's bypass. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were delving into the ship's very soul, or whatever passed for one in these cold, metal halls. Eventually, they reached a heavily shielded room, its door standing resolute like a sentinel at a fortress gate. Thalia set to work with her tools, the click and whir of her efforts echoing in the silence. "Feels like breaking into a bank," Jarvik commented, casting wary glances down the corridor. "Except instead of gold, we're looking for answers. Less shiny, more infuriating. Maybe the answers are encased in gold," Vex replied. "One can dream, right? Dreams don't pay," Jarvik reminded him with a smirk, but Vex waved him off. Thalia cracked the door's encryption, and it slid open to reveal a small chamber lined with servers and data cores. The air inside was cold and sterile, like a laboratory or perhaps a mausoleum. "There it is," Thalia said, indicating the largest of the cores. "That's our jackpot, or Pandora's box," Jarvik quipped. "But who's counting?" Vex approached the core with the cautious reverence of someone handling a live grenade. "All right, let's see what secrets you're hiding." They extracted the core, Thalia connecting it to her tablet as the data poured in. It was a treasure trove of information, a digital tapestry of orders, classifications, and directives so labyrinthine it made the tax code look like a bedtime story. "Seems like this whole level 0 thing is some kind of classification system," Thalia explained, her eyes scanning the data with growing excitement. "Classified ships, operations, you name it. Looks like they were doing some pretty shady stuff out here." "Shady?" Vex echoed, raising an eyebrow. "In our line of work, that's saying something." "Wait," Thalia said, holding up a hand. "There's more. Instructions on how to disable the defense systems. Apparently there's a security flaw, something about a remote override." "Great," Vex said, nodding in approval. "Finally, some good news. But we need access to the mainframe," she added quickly. "And I've got a feeling it's not going to be just sitting around waiting for us." Jarvik sighed, holstering his pistol. "You know, call me crazy, but I think the universe has it out for us." Vex grinned. "Welcome to my world. All right, let's get back to the rust bucket and see what HQ makes of all this. Maybe they'll have someone who can make sense of this mess." As they retraced their steps, the weight of their discovery pressed heavy on their minds. The derelict had been a tomb, but it had also been a vault of secrets, secrets that might just change everything. Back on the rust bucket, they set course for HQ, each of them lost in thought as the ship powered up. The stars streaked by outside the viewports, oblivious to the tiny ship and its crew. "So," Jarvik said, breaking the silence, "do you think anyone at HQ is actually going to be happy about this?" Vex shrugged. "Probably not, but at least they'll be as miserable as we are." Thalia chuckled, tapping away at her console. "Here's hoping we find the answers before the universe decides to throw another curveball our way." With the rust bucket's engines carrying them away from the derelict and its ghostly secrets, Vex settled back into his seat. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, with a mix of defiance, irreverence, and just enough madness to keep things interesting. To hell and back, he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And then some, Thalia added, a gleam in her eye. As the ship hurtled through the void, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental, something that could redefine their understanding of the universe and their place within it. But for now, all they could do was keep moving forward, one mystery at a time, with a middle finger ready to greet whatever came next. The rust bucket hummed along like an old dog still hobbling after too many kicks. Vex, slouched in his chair like a man whose spine had developed an addiction to gravity, gazed out at the stars. Each one twinkled back, indifferent to his troubles, like a million tiny pinpricks of cosmic apathy. Thalia sat hunched over her console, face bathed in the soft glow of a dozen displays, fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon who'd just downed a double shot of cheap whiskey. Jarvik lounged nearby, looking about as alert as a sloth on sedatives. "So what are we betting on?" Jarvik asked, his voice a lazy drawl. "Aliens, void monsters, or just bureaucratic hell?" Vex grunted. "Knowing our luck, probably all three. Maybe they'll throw in a black hole for good measure." Thalia glanced up. "I'd put my money on a probe from the Alien Authority." "They never miss an opportunity to stick their beak where it doesn't belong." "That's optimistic of you," Vex replied, rubbing his temples. "An Alien Authority probe is like getting a letter from your ex's lawyer. You know it's bad news, you just don't know exactly how it's going to screw you." The comm unit on Thalia's desk chirped, a shrill reminder that the universe loved poking them with something sharp. She flicked a switch and a garbled voice came through, robotic and cold as interstellar space. The kind of voice that made you want to check the thermostat. "Unidentified vessel, this is a probe from the United Galactic Authority. State your purpose and prepare for inspection." "Right on cue," Jarvik said, feigning surprise. "I'm shocked. Time to pull out the welcome mat," Vex said. "Thalia, how long until we can hack that thing?" She shot him a look that could have melted titanium. "Give me a sec." Vex watched her work, fingers flying over her controls like they were engaged in a no-holds-barred brawl. The probe hung outside, an ominous presence that made the rust bucket suddenly feel about as secure as a cardboard box in a rainstorm. "Hope you're good at sweet-talking," Jarvik said. "We're gonna need to be real convincing to get out of this one." "Convincing? No problem," Vex replied. "I've been lying to myself for years. Now I just need to do it to someone else." Thalia typed furiously, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm inputting the data core into the probe systems. If this works, we might just get a peek inside their playbook." "If it doesn't work?" Jarvik asked, though the answer was obvious. "Then we're screwed," Thalia said with a twisted grin. "But at least we'll go down in flames together, right?" "Nothing says team spirit like mutual destruction," Vex quipped, watching the probe's blinking lights with growing unease. The seconds dragged by like a procession of unwanted house guests, each one making itself at home in Vex's growing anxiety. Then Thalia let out a triumphant whoop. "Got it, we're in." "Great," Vex said. "Now, let's see if it's worth all the trouble." Thalia's screen bloomed with alien symbols and glyphs, a chaotic tapestry of meaning that defied instant comprehension. But she was already on it, decrypting the data with the zeal of someone who'd just discovered a new kind of candy. "Looks like we've got access to their surveillance logs," Thalia explained. "They've been watching this sector for a while, tracking unauthorized salvage operations." "Which means us," Vex surmised. "Yup," she nodded. "And they're not just watching, they're prepping for something, some kind of sweep. If they catch us, they'll slap us with every fine and penalty they can dream up." "Terrific," Jarvik muttered, as if we weren't in deep enough shit already. Vex's mind raced. They needed to use this information, turn it to their advantage before it turned them into space debris. A plan began to form, half-baked and reckless, just the way he liked it. "All right, listen up," Vex said, his voice taking on the tone of a man who'd just decided to jump off a cliff and trust he'd learn to fly on the way down. "We're gonna feed that probe some false data, make it think we're somewhere we're not." "And how do we do that?" Jarvik asked, skepticism etched into every syllable. Thalia was already on it, a smirk stretching across her face. "If I can patch into the probe's sensor suite, I can loop their feedback, make them chase ghosts." "Ghosts in space," Vex said with a chuckle. "I like it, it's poetic." "Or suicidal," Jarvik added. "But I've come to terms with my mortality." "Let's hope the probe isn't smarter than we are," Thalia said, fingers dancing over her console as she worked her magic. Vex watched it all unfold, his mind a whirl of dark possibilities. If they pulled this off, they'd be off the hook, at least until the next cosmic disaster came knocking. If not, well, he'd always wondered what it'd be like to die in space. Minutes ticked by, each one a tiny eternity filled with tension and anticipation. Then Thalia let out a breath and hit the final key. Done. "The probe should be chasing its tail now," she said, her voice tinged with triumph. "Nice work," Vex said, feeling the first stirrings of hope in what felt like eons. "Now let's get this data to HQ before they decide we're expendable." As the rust bucket surged forward, leaving the confused probe behind, Vex allowed himself a faint smile. They'd bought themselves a reprieve, at least for now. The universe, with all its hostile wonders and indifferent stars, would have to wait its turn. So, Jarvik said, leaning back with an air of feigned casualness, what's the plan when we get to HQ? You know, after they thank us with a bullet or a lifetime of servitude. Vex shrugged, a nonchalant gesture that belied the unease still thrumming through him like a live wire. We let them know what we found. Let them deal with the fallout. With any luck, they'll be too busy cleaning up the mess to come after us. And if Luck decides to take a vacation, Thalia asked, not looking up from her console, then we improvise. Isn't that what we do best? Vex replied, a grin tugging at his lips. Only because we're too broke to plan, Jarvik said, shaking his head. But yeah, I guess it's our only option. As the rust bucket hurtled through the void, the stars blurring into streaks of light outside the viewport, Vex allowed himself a moment of reflection. They were caught in a web of intrigue, one that threatened to choke them at any moment. But for now, they'd managed to slip through the strands, just one step ahead of the spider. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to turn the tables, to show the universe that humanity wasn't just a bunch of stubborn fools clinging to their place in the stars, but something more, something that could adapt and fight, even in the face of overwhelming odds. To hell and back, he murmured again, the words a promise and a challenge rolled into one. As the ship carried them forward, the weight of their discovery and the danger it brought hung over them like a storm cloud that refused to move on. They were heading into the unknown, but Vex felt a spark of determination flare to life within him. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, armed with their wits, their defiance, and just enough madness to make it interesting. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out the other side with a story worth telling. Here's to the next crisis, Thalia said, raising an imaginary glass. Long may it rain, Jarvik replied, a lopsided grin on his face. As the rust bucket continued its journey, Vex settled back, eyes fixed on the stars. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something big. Something that could redefine everything they thought they knew. But for now, all they could do was move forward, one step at a time, with a healthy dose of skepticism, and a readiness to greet the universe with a grin and an extended middle finger. The rust bucket groaned like an old man forced to get out of bed on a cold morning. Vex was sure the ship's bones creaked as it limped away from the confused probe. Just when he thought they'd shaken off their cosmic shadow, alarms blared like a judgmental mother-in-law on a bad day. Incoming projectile, Thalia announced, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. Looks like the probe decided to throw a tantrum. Great, Vex muttered. Like I need more things flying at my head today. Jarvik, looking up from a magazine of questionable literary merit, sighed. I knew we should have sent them a fruit basket instead. People appreciate a good fruit basket. Vex didn't have time for Jarvik's sarcasm. The universe had decided to rain hell down on them, and as usual it wasn't bothering to bring an umbrella. He slammed his hand down on the comm, barking orders like a frantic conductor trying to keep an orchestra of drunk musicians in sync. Thalia, evasive maneuvers. Jarvik, strap in and try not to die. The rust bucket lurched to the side, a maneuver that felt less like a graceful dodge and more like a drunken stumble. Vex held onto his chair, gritting his teeth as the ship shuddered under the strain. The incoming projectile zipped past, but not before clipping the ship's rear end. A gut-wrenching screech echoed through the rust bucket, like the universe itself was tearing them a new one. The lights flickered and the ship groaned again, this time with less protest and more resignation. Damage report, Vex demanded, though he wasn't sure if he really wanted to know. Let's see, Thalia replied, flicking switches and pressing buttons with a mechanical ease. We've lost a chunk of the aft section. Power's down to 50% and life support's taking a nap. So, a normal Tuesday, Jarvik quipped, trying to lighten the mood as he held onto his seat with white knuckles. Vex's mind raced. They were adrift in hostile space, hanging by a thread thinner than Jarvik's patience, but he wasn't about to let a cranky probe and a few bruises stop them. All right, team, Vex said, trying to muster whatever scraps of authority he had left. The universe is doing its best to kill us, but it's not our time yet. We need to get this ship back in shape before it decides to fully collapse on us. Thalia snorted. You got any duct tape, Captain? Maybe a couple of prayers to throw in for good measure. Wouldn't hurt, Vex replied. But let's start by patching the hull and getting life support back online. I'm not keen on suffocating today. Jarvik finally unlatched his harness and made his way to the back, his usually languid movements now tinged with urgency. I'll see what I can do about the power. Maybe sweet-talk the engines into behaving. Vex nodded, watching his crew spring into action despite the chaos. They may have been a ragtag bunch of misfits on a ship held together by hope and whispered threats, but they were his misfits, and they always found a way to scrape through. As Thalia worked her magic on the systems, Vex moved to the rear of the ship, where Jarvik was elbow-deep in wires and sparking circuits. The man's hands moved with the practiced ease of someone who'd once diffused bombs for sport. "How's it looking, Jarvik?" Vex asked, though he wasn't expecting a positive answer. "Like I'm trying to convince a cat to take a bath," Jarvik replied without looking up. "This baby needs more than a quick fix, but I'll get her purring again." "Just give me a bit, take whatever time you need," Vex said, then added with a wry grin, "preferably not more than 10 minutes. Jarvik snorted, a sound that was half amusement and half derision. "No pressure then." Vex left him to it, returning to the bridge where Thalia was muttering to herself as she adjusted the controls. The woman had the tenacity of a bulldog and the patience of a saint, but even she had her limits. "How's it going?" Vex asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Just another day in paradise," Thalia replied, her tone dripping with irony. "I've rerouted power to life support, but we're running on fumes. We need to find a safe haven to make proper repairs." Vex rubbed his chin, considering their options. They were miles away from the nearest friendly port, and the rust bucket wasn't in any condition to handle another skirmish. But sitting here waiting for another cosmic slap on the face wasn't an option either. "There's a derelict ship not too far from here," Thalia suggested, her eyes scanning the data. "We could scavenge for parts, maybe patch ourselves up enough to limp to HQ. A derelict, huh?" Vex mused. "Could be a gold mine or a graveyard, but beggars can't be choosers." "Exactly," Thalia agreed, "and given our lovely new neighbors, we're not in a position to be picky." Vex nodded, feeling a grim determination settle over him. They'd faced worse odds, and while the universe seemed hell-bent on turning them into space dust, he wasn't about to roll over and play dead. "Set a course," he instructed. "And let's hope the ghosts on that ship are feeling generous." The rust bucket limped along, its engines coughing and wheezing like an asthmatic smoker. Vex kept an eye on the flickering readouts, a silent prayer slipping through his mind that they'd make it in one piece. As the derelict loomed into view, Vex felt a spark of hope. It was a hulking mass of twisted metal and forgotten dreams, but to him, it was a beacon. A sign that they had a chance, however slim, to crawl back from the brink. "Docking procedures ready," Thalia said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Let's do it," Vex replied, his eyes trained on the derelict like a gambler eyeing his last chip. The rust bucket shuddered as it latched onto the derelict, the docking clamps clanging with a finality that felt like a judge's gavel. Vex took a deep breath, the air in the ship tasting slightly metallic, like the universe's cruel sense of humor. "Jarvik, grab your tools," Vex called over the comm. "Time to see what treasures this graveyard holds." "On it, Captain," came Jarvik's reply, laden with the kind of bravado reserved for fools and heroes. As the airlock hissed open, Vex led the way into the derelict's cold, dark corridors. Each step echoed like a ghostly whisper, and Vex had to resist the urge to shiver. He hated derelicts. They always felt like walking through someone else's funeral. "Stick together," he warned, his voice low as he glanced over his shoulder at Thalia and Jarvik. "I don't want to lose anyone in this maze." "Don't worry," Thalia said, flashing him a humorless smile. "If something's going to kill us, I'd prefer we go down in a blaze of glory, not by getting lost." Jarvik chuckled, the sound bouncing off the walls. "And here I thought we'd agreed on dying of old age." Vex led them deeper into the ship, scanning for anything useful. The derelict was a silent witness to its own demise, with wires hanging like entrails and panels ripped open in desperation. It was a haunting reminder of what could happen if they let their guard down. "Find anything?" Vex asked as they reached what used to be the engine room. "Nothing that screams easy fix," Thalia replied, poking at a console that sparked in response. "But I might be able to jury-rig something to boost our power." Jarvik nodded, crouching beside a pile of debris. "I can scavenge some parts. Might not be pretty, but it should hold us until we reach HQ." Vex felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't as doomed as the universe wanted them to believe. He watched as his crew worked, their determination in the face of adversity a testament to their resilience. "Keep at it," Vex said, clapping Jarvik on the shoulder. "We'll get through this. We always do." "Sure," Jarvik said, smirking. "And if not, at least we'll have a hell of a story to tell St. Peter." Vex chuckled, the sound echoing through the derelict. Despite the odds, despite the universe's best attempts to snuff them out, they were still here, still fighting. And as long as they were breathing, they'd keep pushing forward, middle fingers raised in defiance of whatever the cosmos threw their way. "Let's get this done," Vex said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "We've got a date with HQ, and I don't plan on being late." As the crew worked together, Vex felt a sense of camaraderie stronger than any bond forged by blood or law. They were a team, a dysfunctional family held together by necessity and sheer stubbornness. And nothing, not even the cold, unfeeling void of space, would tear them apart. The rust bucket might have been a patchwork of salvaged parts and desperate dreams, but it was home, and as long as it held together, so would they. "To hell and back," Vex muttered once more, the words a quiet vow, and with that the rust bucket and its crew pressed on, undeterred by the universe's best attempts to break them. They'd survive, they'd thrive, and they'd do it with a smile, a wink, and a healthy dose of dark humor. The rust bucket was holding together with the sort of dignity reserved for drunken clowns trying to stay on their stilts. Vex watched as Jarvik and Thalia wrestled with the derelict's leftovers, their faces illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. The engine room of the abandoned colony ship looked like it had seen better days, if one was to assume days came in the form of meteoric crashes and apocalyptic parties. Jarvik, elbow deep in what was probably a vital system, grunted, "This ship's got more loose wires than my last relationship. Sounds like a shocking love life," Thalia quipped, eyes darting between monitors as she tried to make sense of the cobweb of circuits. "Don't remind me," Jarvik replied, though a hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Still, anything's better than suffocating in space. Vex studied them with a mixture of admiration and pity. They were scrounging around a ghost ship for scraps, and yet somehow they still managed to banter like they were in a grim parody of a sitcom. "Any progress?" Vex asked, trying to sound more optimistic than he felt. Thalia glanced at him, her face etched with concentration. "We're getting there. Patience, Captain." "Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither was this piece of junk," Jarvik added, tugging at a stubborn wire. "But if I can get this, there we go." There was a spark, both literal and metaphorical, and the derelict hummed to life, if only for a moment. It was the mechanical equivalent of CPR, and Vex felt a flicker of hope. "Nice work," Vex said, nodding appreciatively. "Now let's see if we can get anything useful from this tin can." Thalia tapped a few keys, and a console nearby spluttered, its screen slowly warming up to display a jumble of ancient files. "Looks like there's some old data logs here. Maybe they can tell us what happened." "You mean why this flying coffin decided to take a nap in the middle of nowhere?" Jarvik asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Color me intrigued." Thalia worked her magic, and soon a garbled message played over the speakers. It was a distorted voice, crackling with static like a ghost telling its final story. "Classified as Level 0. Change. Fate." Vex leaned in closer, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "Level 0. Isn't that the bureaucratic equivalent of a death sentence? More like the universe's way of saying you're screwed," Jarvik muttered, shaking his head. Thalia frowned, replaying the message. "But there's something about changing that classification. Maybe this ship was onto something, a way to flip the bird at the cosmic judges and walk away scot-free," Vex mused. "Sounds like a fairy tale. Fairies might not pay the bills," Thalia said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "But if there's a chance," Jarvik shrugged, the universal gesture of "what have we got to lose? Better than our current retirement plan." Vex contemplated the message, feeling the stirrings of a plan form in the back of his mind. "If this ship had a solution to our Level 0 problem, we need to find it. It might be the edge we need. Assuming it didn't get them killed," Thalia pointed out, ever the realist. "Either way," Vex said, "we need to know. Keep digging through these logs. See if you can find anything else." As Thalia continued to sift through the digital graveyard, Vex took a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. Their ship was one patch away from disintegration. They were adrift in hostile space, and yet here they were, grasping at the remnants of a derelict's last gasp for survival. "More tea, Vex?" Jarvik asked, holding up a cup he'd scavenged from the wreck. "I hear it's the secret ingredient to solving diabolical mysteries." Vex chuckled, shaking his head. "Thanks, but I'll stick to hoping the universe doesn't throw another wrench at us." Jarvik smirked, taking a sip from the cup. "Suit yourself. But if this ship's got a map to something shiny, I'm claiming first dibs." "Noted," Vex replied, rolling his eyes. "Priorities, Jarvik, priorities." The console let out a beep, grabbing their attention. Thalia's face lit up with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "I found something. It's a set of coordinates and a series of instructions. Looks like they were planning something big, like a cosmic heist," Jarvik suggested with a grin. Thalia shook her head, but her eyes glinted with possibility. "More like a way to outrun the authorities. This could be it, Vex, our way out." Vex felt a strange mix of hope and dread. Hope that they'd found a lifeline. Dread that it was just another cosmic trick, but either way it was a chance, and chances were something they couldn't afford to pass up. "All right," he said, steeling himself. "Let's get back to the rust bucket and see if we can make sense of this. We're not out of the woods yet, but damn if we're not going to try." They gathered their findings and headed back, the derelict's corridors echoing with their footsteps. It was a place of death, but it had given them something to live for, or at least a reason to keep fighting. As they reboarded the rust bucket, Vex felt the familiar embrace of his battered ship. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and with any luck it'd get them through this mess. "Jarvik, see if you can boost the power with those parts," Vex instructed, already at the helm. "Thalia, plot those coordinates." "Aye, Captain," Thalia said, her fingers dancing over the controls. Jarvik headed for the engine room with a resigned sigh. "Time to work some magic, I guess. Just keep the ship from falling apart while I'm gone." "No promises," Vex replied, grinning. As Thalia set the rust bucket on course, Vex couldn't help but feel the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed by reality, but for now it was enough to keep them going. "So, Captain," Thalia said, her voice teasing but warm, "think we'll actually find a way out of this mess?" Vex shrugged, his expression somewhere between optimism and cynicism. "Who knows, but as long as we keep moving, we've got a shot. And if the universe wants to keep messing with us, we'll mess right back." "Sounds like a plan," Thalia said, flashing him a grin, and with that they set off, their ship limping but determined. The universe might have been a cruel, indifferent place, but they were more stubborn than the cosmos had bargained for. They'd face whatever came next with a joke on their lips and defiance in their hearts. As the stars whizzed by, Vex felt the weight of the unknown pressing on him, but he knew one thing for certain: whatever happened, they would face it together. A ragtag crew of misfits, underdogs, and dreamers, and as long as there were stars to aim for, they'd keep reaching. "To hell and back," Vex muttered to himself, a promise as much as a curse. The rust bucket shuddered, engines coughing and sputtering like an old man clinging to life. But it held, and so did they, hurtling through the void on a prayer and a promise, ready to flip the bird at fate itself. The rust bucket wheezed through the cosmos, a testament to man's will to keep moving even when every bolt and wire begged for a long, quiet death. In the flickering light of the control room, Commander Harlan Vex leaned back, watching stars zip past like they were late for something important. The control room smelled of despair and burnt coffee, which was about as close as one could get to home without the heartbreak. "All right, crew," Vex said, eyeing the comm unit like it might sprout legs and scamper off. "We've got a plan. A stupid, dangerous plan that's likely to get us killed. So naturally it's our best option." "Sounds about right," Jarvik chimed in from a corner, where he was doing something unspeakable to a panel with a toolkit that looked more like a medieval torture set. "In this line of work, safe and sane is just another way to say bored and broke." Thalia nodded, her eyes locked on the monitors like they owed her money. "If we're gonna stick it to the cosmic overlords, we might as well do it with style. What's the play, Vex?" Vex grinned, a rare flash of teeth that suggested he might know what he was doing. "We're gonna broadcast a signal so loud, so obnoxiously human, that the aliens won't know whether to laugh or tremble, or both," Jarvik chimed in, never one to pass up an opportunity for sarcasm. "Exactly," Vex continued, ignoring the interjection. "We've got this set of coordinates from our lovely derelict friend. We'll hop over there and set up a makeshift transmitter. With any luck, it'll draw attention." "Attention from whom, though?" Thalia asked, fingers still dancing over her console. "The last time we got attention, it ended with projectile volleys and evacuation drills," Vex shrugged. "Attention from anyone who might think humanity is worth more than level 0, even if it's just to see us make fools of ourselves. And what if it's attention from the cosmic exterminators who put us on death row in the first place?" Jarvik asked, arching an eyebrow. "Then we show them what a bad idea it is to underestimate a determined bunch of idiots," Vex replied. "Besides, I've always wanted to see what happens when you poke a bear in zero gravity." Thalia snorted. "Can't say I've ever wondered about that, but I'm game. Let's see if we can't shake up the status quo." With that, the rust bucket continued its wheezy trek towards the coordinates on Thalia's screen. Vex could only hope that what they found there was more than just space debris and disappointment, a cosmic landfill of dreams that had floated too close to a black hole. As they approached the coordinates, the constellations shifted slightly, revealing a cluster of ships. No, not ships. Artifacts. Old, forgotten relics from a bygone era when humanity still believed in happy endings and good guys. "Well, would you look at that," Jarvik said, peering through the viewport. "A graveyard of human ambition. Makes you wonder who forgot to send the memo about cleaning up after a galactic apocalypse. More like a museum of our worst decisions," Thalia added, scanning the area. "But if these things still have power, they might just be relics of hope." Jarvik grinned. "Hope, that's a dangerous word in these parts." "I like it." Vex looked at his crew, misfits and outcasts like him. "All right, let's set up that transmitter and make some noise. Remember, we're not just broadcasting for help. We're sending a message that we're not dead yet." "What do you want on the playlist?" Thalia asked, half joking. "How about We Will Rock You?" Jarvik suggested. "Seems appropriate," Vex chuckled. "Let's just focus on getting the signal out first. If we survive this, I'll let you DJ the afterparty." The crew worked together, combining their limited resources and vast ingenuity to jury-rig a transmitter from what might have been a coffee maker in a previous life. Soon, they were ready, the transmitter humming with a power that belied its cobbled-together appearance. "All right, here goes nothing," Vex said, flipping the switch. The signal burst forth, a digital scream into the void, carrying humanity's defiance and desperation across the stars. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that creeps in before the universe decides to kick you in the teeth. Then, the monitors lit up with incoming signals. Flickers of recognition from species who'd forgotten humans even existed, now reminded of their tenacity. Looks like we've got company, Thalia observed, her voice tinged with surprise, and not just the bad kind. Vex watched as the signals rolled in offers of aid, acknowledgement of humanity's gutsy stand, even a few threats that bordered on half-hearted. It was more than they could have hoped for. Well, I'll be damned, Jarvik said, shaking his head. Looks like we've got ourselves a coalition. Vex grinned, the kind of smile that could cut through the darkest despair. Never thought I'd see the day. Humanity's own ragtag rebellion, all thanks to a bunch of aliens who thought they could write us off. You think this'll get the cosmic judges to reconsider? Thalia asked, a hint of hope in her voice. If it doesn't, they'll at least have a hell of a mess to clean up, Vex replied. And maybe, just maybe, we'll remind them why humans are a species worth keeping around. The rust bucket drifted in its orbit, a tiny speck of defiance against the backdrop of the universe, and as the signals continued to pulse outwards, Vex felt a strange sense of peace. They were still in the fight, still flipping the bird at fate. To hell and back, he muttered once more, feeling the weight of his crew's determination beside him. And we're not done yet. The rust bucket's engines sputtered back to life, pulling them away from the graveyard of humanity's past. They had a new direction now, one charted by hope and defiance, with allies they never expected at their side. So, Captain, Thalia said, her eyes on the stars ahead. Where to now? Vex leaned back, letting the hum of the ship vibrate through him. Wherever there's someone arrogant enough to think they can tell us what we're worth, he replied. Let's show them what it means to be human. And with that, the rust bucket sped onwards, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to go quietly into the night. They might have been battered and bruised, but they were far from broken. Jarvik shot Vex a sideways glance. You realize we're still flying a rust bucket, right? I mean, we're basically the cosmic equivalent of a dumpster fire. Vex shrugged. Yeah, but we're a dumpster fire with a purpose, and that's more than most folks out here can say. So, what's our next move? Jarvik asked, settling back into his seat. I mean, assuming we survive the inevitable retaliation. We keep going, Vex said, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. And if the universe wants to keep testing us, we'll keep showing them what we're made of. Reckless optimism, Thalia said with a smirk. It's almost charming. Charming or not, Vex replied, it's all we've got. And sometimes that's enough. With the stars as their guide and the universe as their playground, the crew of the Rust Bucket continued their journey. They were a band of misfits, driven by dreams and defiance, and they had no intention of bowing to the whims of fate. As the Rust Bucket sped away, leaving behind the remnants of humanity's past, Vex couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. They had faced the void and come out swinging, armed with nothing but their wits and an unyielding spirit. And as long as they had each other, they'd keep fighting, for their future, for their freedom, and for the right to define their own destiny. Here's to the next adventure, Vex said, raising an imaginary glass to his crew. And to the idiots who didn't see this coming, Jarvik added, raising his own invisible toast. May they underestimate us at their peril, Thalia said, her voice filled with determination. Together they faced the unknown, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, because in the end they were more than just survivors. They were warriors, dreamers, and rebels, and they were just getting started. Well, would you look at this, Jarvik said, scratching his chin as the rust bucket approached Earth. The view was a sight to behold, if you squinted and ignored the pollution rings that made Saturn's rings look like amateur ire. Home sweet home. If you like your homes riddled with bureaucratic potholes and existential dread, the rust bucket had somehow survived its cosmic joyride, patched up with more duct tape and blind faith than actual engineering. Vex sat in the command chair, which groaned under the weight of his responsibility. He chuckled as he imagined the faces of Earth's bigwigs when they found out a bunch of nobodies in a space jalopy had become the universe's new poster children for human tenacity. Think they'll give us medals, Thalia mused, stretching her arms. She had the look of someone who'd seen the universe's worst and come back with a souvenir mug. Only if they plan on using them as makeshift ashtrays, Vex replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But hey, maybe they'll name a crater after us, Jarvik snorted, or a sewage treatment plant. Fitting, Thalia quipped, her fingers tapping away at her console with practiced indifference. Considering the amount of crap we've waded through, they were scanning Earth's channels trying to gauge the mood. It was mostly static and bureaucratic bluster, but there was a hint of something else, excitement, maybe even hope. It was like watching a cockroach discover it could fly, delightful if not a little unnerving. Look at that, Thalia said, eyes widening. We're trending, only took the threat of cosmic annihilation, Vex mused. Imagine the marketing potential. Earth loomed larger, its outline smeared with the smog of progress. The crew of the Rust Bucket, now accidental heroes, were returning to a planet that barely remembered them. But fate has a funny way of flipping the script. What was once a cosmic backwater was now the center of galactic curiosity. Vex leaned back, letting the moment sink in. Remember, folks, we're not here to save the world. Just remind it that we're still kicking. Yeah, Jarvik said, because who else is going to remind folks not to mess with the ones who invented reality TV? As the rust bucket docked, they were greeted by a mix of awe and confusion, like the prodigal children returning home to find their parents had rented out their rooms. A delegation awaited, flanked by the obligatory banners and awkward speeches. Vex could almost taste the insincerity. "Welcome home, Rust Bucket crew," announced a man in a suit that screamed government issue. "Your bravery has been an inspiration." "Bravery, stupidity," Jarvik muttered under his breath. "Tomato, tomato." The man smiled, oblivious. "You've given humanity new hope." Vex stepped forward, playing his part in the charade. "Glad to be of service. Though truth be told, we were just trying not to get splattered across the cosmos." Nods and polite chuckles filled the air, the kind of laughter that happens when people aren't sure if they're supposed to be amused or appalled. Vex had always been good at that. Next came the interviews, the kind where talking heads dissect everything you say until it's as lifeless as an asteroid. Thalia was a natural, spinning tales of their journey with just enough hyperbole to make it interesting. Jarvik, on the other hand, had the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "How did it feel to defy the cosmic overlords?" a reporter asked, shoving a mic in Vex's face. "Imagine you're the universe's designated punching bag," Vex replied, "and one day you decide to punch back. And did you ever doubt you'd succeed?" Another inquired, eyes gleaming with the hunger of someone who'd never left Earth's orbit. "Doubt," Vex laughed, "my constant companion. But if you let doubt run the show, you might as well stay in bed." Thalia chimed in, her voice smooth as a well-oiled lie. "We just figured, why not? After all, what's the universe gonna do? Kill us twice?" With the formalities out of the way, the crew found themselves in the middle of Earth's newest phenomenon, humanity's unplanned reunion tour. Events were being organized, alliances forged. It was like watching a dysfunctional family rediscover why they avoided each other in the first place. "Look at them," Vex said, nodding towards a group of diplomats. "The movers and shakers, trying to figure out how to put a shiny spin on our survival, and failing miserably," Jarvik added. "Bureaucrats couldn't organize a piss-up in a brewery, but despite the cynicism, something was happening. People were talking, sharing stories of distant worlds and forgotten dreams." The crew had unwittingly lit a fire under humanity's collective ass, and the flames were spreading faster than a politician's promise. "Feels like we've turned into the poster kids for can-do spirit," Thalia remarked, her skepticism tempered by a hint of pride. "Yeah," Vex said, "and to think all it took was risking our necks in the name of salvage." Who knew humanity's salvation would be a side gig? The days turned into a blur of meetings and celebrations, each more surreal than the last. The Rust Bucket crew was now the hottest ticket in town, a living reminder that even the smallest ship could make the biggest waves. But beneath the fanfare and false smiles, a change was brewing. Humanity was plotting its next move, bold, reckless, and entirely fitting for a species that thrived on chaos. Plans were being drawn up, new ships designed, each a testament to human resilience. As Vex looked out at the gathering throngs, he felt a strange mix of emotions. They'd come back as heroes in a world that had forgotten what that meant. But maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to remind it. "Captain," Thalia said, joining him at the railing, "you ever think we'd live to see something like this?" "Not in a million years," Vex replied, "and yet here we are, defying expectations just like we always do." "So what now?" she asked, her eyes scanning the horizon. Vex took a deep breath, letting the moment stretch out. "Now we see if humanity can keep this momentum going. If not, well, at least we had a hell of a ride." The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the city. It was a sight that could almost make one forget the universe's indifference, almost. As Earth's leaders debated the future, the Rust Bucket crew took solace in their unexpected victory. They'd shown the galaxy that humanity was far from finished. That they could still get up after being knocked down, even if it meant crawling through the mud. "And to think," Jarvik said, joining them, "this all started because we wanted to raid a derelict." "Go figure," Vex replied, shaking his head. "We're living proof that stupidity and luck can sometimes trump genius." The crew shared a laugh, the kind that comes from knowing you've cheated fate. They were still here, still fighting, and for now, that was enough. "Here's to the next chapter," Thalia said, raising an imaginary glass. "And to the idiots who didn't see us coming," Jarvik added, clinking his own invisible toast. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a sky full of stars, each one a reminder of the possibilities that lay beyond. They might be battered, bruised, and flying a rust bucket, but damn it, they were pioneers. As Earth prepared for its next leap into the unknown, the Rust Bucket crew found themselves at the forefront of a new era. They'd shown the universe that humanity was more than just a footnote, that they could chart their own course, even if it meant flying by the seat of their pants. "And to think," Vex said, eyes fixed on the stars, "we're just getting started." The crew nodded in agreement, ready for whatever came next. for while the universe might be vast and indifferent, they'd carved out a place for themselves. A place where dreams, no matter how foolish or far-fetched, were worth chasing. New adventures, new worlds, Thalia mused, a smile playing at her lips. Bring it on, Jarvik replied, ever the optimist. We've got plenty of duct tape left. With that, they turned back to the party below, because in the end they were more than just survivors. They were dreamers, rebels, and fighters, and they weren't done yet. As the night wore on, the crew of the Rust Bucket celebrated their improbable victory. They'd faced the void and lived to tell the tale, ready to take on whatever the universe threw at them next. And as Vex looked around at his crew, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They'd come a long way from being just another group of misfits trying to make a living in the cold depths of space. To the Rust Bucket, Vex said, raising his imaginary glass one last time. And to humanity, Thalia added, matching his toast. May we continue to surprise ourselves, Jarvik finished, a grin splitting his face. With that, they turned back to the party, ready to face whatever came next, because in the end they were more than just survivors. They were dreamers, rebels, and fighters, and they weren't done yet. As the stars twinkled overhead, the crew of the Rust Bucket knew that their journey was far from over. They'd faced the void and lived to tell the tale, ready to take on whatever the universe threw at them next. And as they celebrated their improbable victory, they knew one thing for certain: they were just getting started.